when you went to that cross. So, Father, I thank you for restoration this morning. I thank you for healing. I thank you for deliverance. I thank you for direction and breaking discouragement and depression over people in this place this morning. By the power of your blood. We worship you today. We rejoice today because we have the victory. Today is the day of stepping over fear and into faith.
Yes, amen.
So, Father, I thank you this morning for what's just started here today. Deliverance is in this place. Freedom is in this place. Father, I thank you for it this morning. Now, just as we close out this work, just lift your voices and rejoice because you have the victory. Go ahead, lift your voices and just rejoice. You have the victory. Amen. I'm not sure I even need to preach. I feel like the Lord's done what He's needed to do, but I'll give you what I got. When you show up to a place like this and you just say, do whatever you want. It's amazing how simple the Lord is in doing what He wants. Sometimes we map everything out. We've got all of our schedules and our agendas, and He just is simple sometimes. And I truly believe that in that time of worship, something was accomplished there this morning. And so I'm going to continue. This is part 2 of me talking about faith. Make sure my green light's still on. It is. Part 2 of talking about faith. So last week we started in this subject of faith, and I talked about kind of a broad, generic, what is faith? What does it mean? What does that word mean when you hear faith? So it's just kind of a starter, an introduction, and today I'm going to get a little more specific, and very quickly just a recap of last week. We found that faith is a simple word, but it's very deep, and it's very complex at the same time. I'd said that it takes faith to have faith. You have to have faith to walk in faith. Faith started the minute we got saved. Ephesians 2 says, "For it is by grace you have been saved through faith." So it took faith to believe that God sent His Son to the cross for my salvation. I operated in a level of faith to receive salvation. You operated in a level of faith to receive salvation. Faith sets us apart. Faith sets us above the crowd. People look at us different when we walk in faith, because when you walk in faith, what many people would give up on, you're determined to walk through it. It sets you above the crowd. The Amplified Version in Hebrews 11:1 that we looked at said, "Faith is the assurance or the title deed of the things we hope for." And I read that definition of title deed is a legal deed or document constituting evidence of a right, especially to ownership of property. So faith is my title deed. Faith is my legal document to say that belongs to me. That's mine. So when you operate in faith for something you have in need of, the minute you step out in faith, that's your title deed to say, I own that. That's mine. That belongs to me. Faith becomes your title deed. Faith is the foundation of everything we do. The Message version said that faith is a firm foundation under everything that makes life worth living. If I'm not looking ahead and believing for something in my life that is not a current reality, because that's faith, it's believing in confidence something that isn't reality yet is going to take place. I have a hope and a confidence. If I am not living in that, then I'm not living. And faith is my foundation under all of those things that I'm hoping for. All of those things that makes life worth living. The hope of something not existent is what makes it worth getting up every morning and hoping this is the day. Today's the day. We keep stepping in faith. We keep operating in faith towards those things we're believing for. So today, I'm going to talk about, the title is Faith to Walk in Unknown Places. I want to look at a few scriptures, two main ones, but I've got a few other ones mixed in there. But many times when someone steps out in faith to walk in unknown places, they face questioning and criticism. Are you sure this is God? That's a big one. Are you sure this is God? Well, no, I'm just doing my own thing. No, of course I'm sure it's God. Or I think it's God. But you face those questions. Well, you don't have all the details worked out. This can't be God. God wouldn't call you to do that. All of these things come out. Most of those questions come out of fear. Sometimes it's concern. Sometimes it's selfishness. And sometimes they could be legitimate questions that we need to answer and we need to ask ourselves. Those can be legitimate questions, but you have to be able to gauge why that question is being asked, okay? The key in all of this is, if you don't have all the details, that's okay. If I had all the details and all the answers to the unknown places the Lord leads me, I wouldn't need faith. Faith is walking into the unknown in a hope and in confidence that this is going to work out. You're not going to have all the details when God leads you to unknown places. I want to look at Hebrews 11:7. And we'll spend most of the time in Hebrews because that's where we find the bulk of the scriptures on faith, although faith is throughout the Bible. From Genesis all the way to Revelation, you will see a thread of faith all the way through there. But I want to start with Hebrews 11:7. It says, "It was by faith that Noah built a large boat to save his family from the flood. He obeyed God, who warned him about things that had never happened before. By his faith, Noah condemned the rest of the world, and he received the righteousness that comes by faith." The Message version says it this way: "By faith, Noah built a ship in the middle of dry land. He was warned about something he couldn't see and acted on what he was told. The result, the family was saved. His act of faith drew a sharp line between the evil of the unbelieving world and the rightness of the believing world. As a result, Noah became intimate with God." So he was warned, it says he was warned about something he couldn't see and acted on what he was told. What's faith? Acting on something I cannot see. Something that isn't a reality yet. So Noah had to step out in faith and begin to act on something that he couldn't see. Just how the Lord was directing him. He did what he was told, regardless of what it looked like around him and regardless of what people said. I can imagine that Noah had a lot of criticism. I can imagine that Noah had a lot of questions and a lot of probably some sleepless nights thinking, this is crazy. What am I doing? This doesn't even make sense. But we are all called to build a boat. We're all called to build an ark, to build a ship of some sort in our life. Now, what I might call a boat, to you, you might look at that and say, well, that's nothing. But it's still my boat that I've got to build, that the Lord's calling me to build. It's an ark to me. It may not make sense. I might look around and say, this doesn't even make any sense. People are going to think I'm crazy. Let them think you're crazy. You'll know you're on the right track when you start to face the criticism and the questions that I mentioned. That's a key sign. And some people shy away from what God's called them to do when they start getting criticism and questions, but that's normally a sure sign that, well, you're on the right track. You're right where you need to be. It's part of building a boat in dry land expecting a flood. I read this commentary and it says it this way. Notice that Noah's act of faith was a condemnation on the rest of the world. This doesn't mean that Noah was preaching down to everyone else. It just means that if one man can believe God and trust Him, then all the others could have too. People inherently know this, and this is one of the major reasons they persecute true believers. They know that if their faith is real, then they are condemned. So they want to show their faith to be false to ease their conscience. In other words, people will try to make your faith look like it's not faith to make themselves feel better about not stepping out in faith. Does that make sense? And you see that in life, not just with faith things, but even people, sometimes, I work in business. Even people in business that work hard and they get promoted, others that don't work hard and don't get promoted, try to make your hard work look like, well, that you're sucking up to the boss. You're not really working hard, because it makes them feel better. It's the same thing in this faith walk. You'll get people sometimes that try to make your faith look like, well, that's really not faith. Lois, you're just mad at everybody. You're just doing this because you want to. This isn't faith. It makes them feel better about not walking in faith. What do you do in these situations? You keep building your boat. You keep doing what God told you to do. You keep following His direction. You keep moving forward. If you think you can do what God has called you to do without criticism, don't even bother starting. It's impossible. You're going to face criticism and challenges. It comes with the territory. What stood out to me in this passage that I just read, in the Message version, it says, as a result, Noah became intimate with God. Why did Noah become intimate with God? Because God was the only one that believed in him. When He leads you to walk in unknown places, there will be a time and a season, maybe not all the time, but you will face a time and a season of your life that it's you and God. He's the only one by your side. He's the only one that may believe in you. He's the only one that doesn't think you've completely lost your mind, and it builds an intimacy with the Lord. That's what stood out to me in that. What's that boat? What's that ark in your life that God is calling you to build? It's going to take some faith that looks a little crazy. Jump ahead to the next verses. 8 through 10. It says, it was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and go to another land that God would give him as his inheritance. He went without knowing where he was going, and even when he reached the land God promised him, this one, and I'm going to get to it, but listen to this, verse 9. Even when he reached the land God promised him, he lived there by faith, for he was like a foreigner living in tents. And so did Isaac and Jacob, who inherited the same promise. Abraham was confidently looking forward to a city with eternal foundations, a city designed and built by God. So, something interesting in this passage. The word called here in the original language means to urge. What you are called to do won't be easy. God will be urging you along. He's pulling you along. Have you ever had those moments when you're in the midst of doing what God's called you to do and you just want to give up on it? You're like, this is too hard. I just don't want to keep... But there's something deep down that won't allow you to quit. And we've always said, we'll say, well, that's your calling. It won't allow you to quit. And that is true. But when you understand that to be called means to be urged, it's more than just, it's my calling that won't allow me to quit. It's not me, it's God. That calling is Him urging me. It's Him pushing me and saying, you can't quit. He's pushing me. I gave a word to somebody a few weeks ago when I was here the first week, and I gave that analogy to them in that word. I said, what I see is The Lord, like a child, when your child maybe goes to school, hello, when your child maybe goes to school or they're nervous, and as a parent, you kind of get your hand on their shoulder and you just kind of put, okay, you can do it. Come on, you can do it. That's the calling. That's the urging that the Lord does. So when you have those moments of giving up, your calling is really the Lord urging you. He's got His hand on your shoulder and He's going, okay, go ahead. No, you keep going. Don't give up now. You keep going. That calling becomes an urging from your Father in heaven because He believes in you and He knows what you're called to do. So when you get to those moments where you feel like giving up, remember that, I believe that picture is going to come back to your mind. That deep down, no, I can't give up. This is what I'm called to do, is your Father get His hand on your shoulder and He's just kind of pushing you along. There's something in this passage that jumped out to me when I studied it, and I hadn't paid much attention to it before. But once it stood out to me, I realized that this is a key in walking into the unknown. Verse 9 again says, "And even when he reached the land God promised him, he lived there by faith, for he was like a foreigner living in tents." Wouldn't you think that when you reach the place that God called you and promised you to be in, that you'd feel like, God, I fit right in here. I belong here. But Abraham, it says, he felt like a foreigner. Some translations say Abraham felt like a stranger in the land God promised him to be in. If you've ever walked into unknown places and got where you were going and said, I feel like a stranger here. I don't fit in. Nobody likes me. Nobody wants to associate. I just feel like a foreigner. This feels odd to me. What's our first reaction when we experience that? Well, this can't be right. Something's off. This can't be right. This isn't where I'm supposed to be. I shouldn't be feeling like this. I want to propose to you today that when you arrive at your destination and you feel like a foreigner, that's a sign that you're at your destination. That you're walking in the middle of what God has called you to walk in. When you feel a little bit like a stranger and a foreigner. Look at verse 9 a little closer. The original language starts out with by faith. By faith he dwelt in the land of promise as in a foreign country. That's a closer tie to the original language. By faith here comes from the Greek word that means persuasion or moral conviction. So it wasn't just a simple faith that Abraham stayed there. It was persuasion and moral conviction that kept him there, that caused him to stay even when he felt like a stranger. This tells me that Abraham didn't go in excitement and extreme confidence. His faith, his knowing, his calling persuaded him and urged him to go. It was a persuasion, a moral conviction that this is what I'm supposed to do. This is where I'm supposed to be. So here's how I want to wrap this around to you and what I want to suggest in this. You may have been in a place, you might be currently in a place, or you will be called to go to a place that's unknown to you. Now that doesn't mean necessarily a physical, geographical unknown place, though it could mean that. It doesn't necessarily mean what it is. This represents doing something completely outside of what's familiar to you. It's not normal to you. First, it is the moral conviction, the persuasion that this is what I'm supposed to do that will push you towards the unknown. I don't know what this looks like. This feels foreign, this feels strange, but there's this thing down in me that says this is right. You have a lot of questions, a lot of wondering if you're doing the right thing, but stepping out in faith requires persuasion and moral conviction that I know that this is right. Second, when you arrive at the unknown place, don't throw in the towel if you feel like a stranger in the middle of your promised land and what God directed you to do. The key in all this, and I know some of the questions that are bouncing around in your head right now because I've had them myself. Well, but how do I know that this uncomfortable is God telling me to stay and not God telling me to leave? How do I know this is God telling me this is right and not God telling me this is wrong? That's the question that we all deal with. What I have learned through my own experience, and probably some of you can tell the same thing, is peace. Where's your peace at? Even if you feel like a stranger, but you've got peace about what you're doing and where you're at, you got to follow your peace. Where's your peace at? That peace is the telling of this is right. This is where this is my moral conviction. I know that I know that I know. I bet you Lois could tell you some stories about feeling like a foreigner walking in the unknown. And she may not use the same words. I won't put her on the spot. I'm just nod your head like I'm right. I don't know. But I bet if you asked her, how did you stay feeling like a foreigner in the unknown, she would tell you, it was my peace. I knew that I knew that I knew. It was the calling, the urging, the persuasion, the moral conviction that caused her to say, this is right. This is what I'm supposed to do, regardless of how I feel. My last point here is walking in unknown places requires bold faith. Ephesians 3:12 out of the NLT says, because of Christ and our faith in Him, we can now come boldly and confidently into God's presence. The Message version says, when we trust in Him, we're free to say whatever needs to be said, bold to go wherever we need to go. So I don't have to have fear of God in the sense of being afraid of Him. You know, when we talk about fearing God, that's not I'm shaking and I'm scared of Him. Fear is a reverence of Him. So I don't have to have fear of being afraid to go to Him. When I know who He truly is, when I have that relationship with Him, I can go to God like a child goes to his father. And you've heard me talk about that before. I can go to my Father just like my earthly father and sit with Him and have a talk and lay it all out. This is where I'm at. This is how I feel. I can boldly go to Him. I can say whatever I need to say without condemnation. Walking in unknown places will require you to have that kind of bold faith to go to your Father and say, I am clueless right now. I know where you want to lead me, but I don't want to go. That may be the reality of it sometimes. I know what you want me to do, but I don't want to right now. And like a loving father, he'll, you sit here and let's talk this out a little bit. That urging, that persuasion. We need to do a better job at viewing God. We need to do it, and I'm putting myself in this category, we need to do a better job as ministers at displaying God as that loving Father who's going to sit and listen to us, but He's going to have His hand on our back, kind of pushing us along. The reason why I can go boldly to Him is found in verse 20 of this same chapter, Ephesians 3:20. Now all glory to God who is able through His mighty power at work within us to accomplish infinitely more than we might ask or think. The Amplified version of that same verse says, now to Him who by, in consequence of, the action of His power that is at work within us is able to carry out His purpose and do superabundantly far over and above all that we dare ask or think, infinitely beyond our highest prayers, desires, thoughts, hopes, or dreams. This is why I can go boldly to Him. We need to have this understanding when walking in unknown places, because you're going to find yourself saying, how is this even going to work out? How are all the details going to come together? It's in consequence of the action of His power, that is at work within us. It's because of that power that we can accomplish great things, that we can walk in unknown places, that we're able to carry out His purpose. When I understand that it's His power working in me so I can accomplish this, that's when I can go to Him boldly and say, I'm struggling with this, I need your help. to do super abundantly, far over and above all that we dare ask or think, infinitely beyond our highest prayers, desires, thoughts, hopes, or dreams. What's the biggest, wildest dream that you have? He's able to do more than that. The key is the power, His power, working in me, working in and through you. I can't do it on my own. I can't try to map this thing out on my own and walk my own way. It's His power working through me, working through you, that gives you that ability. We can't limit God through doubt and unbelief. He can only carry us as far as our belief will allow. If I only believe to go this far, He's gonna urge me, but He's not gonna kick me and make me go. He'll carry me as far as my belief will allow Him to carry me. Walking in unknown places isn't easy, but it's something we are all called to do at some point of our life on some level or another. Some of you will be a higher level than another, but it doesn't matter. You're all going to be called to walk into unknown places, into the places that aren't familiar. You'll be called to build a boat in the middle of a drought, expecting a flood when there's no rain in the forecast. And everybody's looking at you like you've lost your mind. Because Ted Shapiro isn't forecasting any rain right now. It's been a drought, and you're building this boat because it's going to flood. You will do it by faith. Remember, by faith, persuasion, and moral conviction is what will push you along. God will continually call you. He'll continually urge you along. Don't allow feeling like a stranger to tell you you're in the wrong place. Follow your peace. It's your peace that will dictate to you correct or incorrect placement. Go boldly to God with your requests and concerns because it's His power working through you. So I challenge you, don't walk away from walking in unknown places. Exercise that faith. It's that foundation under that which makes life worth living. Kim, would you come back to I want to do that first song again that you did, the Rejoice one. I thought about this the other day, and I just kind of jotted this down. It wasn't in my notes, but Psalms 23, though I walk through the shadow of the valley of death. That tells me that I'm going to have some moments of though I walk through. But you're going to walk through it. You're going to walk through some things. You're going to have to walk through the unknown to get to where God has called you to. And I wrote something down this morning on my phone. And I mentioned it in the prayer, but what I really felt was that today is a day of breaking that fear. Fear is the enemy of faith. Okay? That's what the enemy uses, is fear to stop you from stepping out in faith. In Philippians 1:28, and I think I've used this in the past, I've brought this up in other messages, but it says, don't be intimidated in any way by your enemies. This will be a sign to them that they are going to be destroyed, but that you are going to be saved even by God Himself. Don't be intimidated by your enemies. That becomes a sign to them that they're defeated. Don't be intimidated by your enemy. When you don't bow to fear, it shows the enemy that he just lost. He goes, uh-oh, now what? They're not bowing to this intimidation and fear. It becomes a sign to the enemy that he's defeated. He lost because you're not going to bow to that. So my prayer today is that there is a bold faith that arises in each one of us that kicks out fear, that overcomes fear, that allows you to step out and begin to walk in unknown places. So I want to do, let's stand. In this song that she sang first, it's a song of rejoicing. This needs to be your declaration today that you're going to rejoice in all times, in all things, because you've won. And as you make this your declaration, it becomes a sign to the enemy today that he's defeated, that he doesn't have power over you. So let's go ahead and sing through that a couple times.